With the next US presidential election on the horizon in 2024, the two likely candidates, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, would represent dramatically divergent visions for America's role in global affairs. President Biden has worked to restore traditional alliances and commitments since taking office, rebuilding ties with NATO and Europe, strained under Trump, and rejoining agreements like the Iran nuclear deal and Paris Climate Accord. His stances are largely conventional and globalist-focused in the post-World War II order. In contrast, Trump's America First ideology led to friction with allies, withdrawals from multilateral agreements, and the challenging of institutions in his initial term. In a potential second term, Trump may consolidate and expand this unilateralist course further in areas like trade policy, dealings with China and Russia, energy production, immigration enforcement, and more. So, the magnitude of regime change effects depends heavily on the 2024 election winner. We can expect maintained continuity from Biden, contrasting with disruption across fronts under Trump. Here is an assessment of key foreign and domestic spheres a second Trump presidency could transform. China policy. Trump vigorously confronted China in areas like trade and technology transfer in his first term, while also blaming Beijing for the COVID-19 pandemic. He may escalate an economic and technological decoupling from China through sweeping investment barriers and supply chain reshoring efforts in a second term. However, Trump occasionally praised Xi Jinping's strongman leadership in the past, so a surprise reconciliation pivot remains possible too. More concerning are risks of Trump crossing red lines on Taiwan, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, or Tibet human rights issues. China would likely retaliate fiercely, elevating military confrontation chances absent careful crisis management. Russia policy. Early on, Trump aimed for a Russia reset given his admiration for Putin and desire to move past Obama-era tensions, but imposed congressional sanctions amid disputes on issues like Ukraine and NATO commitments dashed hopes for transformed ties. In Act 2, Trump may pursue bold Russia reconciliation again around mutual interests like containing China, but ongoing Ukraine aggression and European brinksmanship could prompt further downward spirals instead. While demanding increased NATO defense budgets, a rhetorically unrestrained Trump risks deals on Ukraine and nuclear arms absent extensive negotiations. Israel and Palestine. Marking a sharp turn from previous policy, Trump took a strongly pro-Israel stance by recognizing disputed Jerusalem as its capital and relocating the U.S. embassy there. His peace plan for the long, intractable conflict proposed Israeli annexation of settlements and was rejected outright by Palestinian leaders for falling well short of their viable state aims. Aligned with Israel's nationalist government, Trump gave them a virtually free hand on issues like settlements and hardline military actions in Gaza, while alienating Palestinians further and sparking wider Middle East resentment. In a second term, Trump would likely continue this lopsided tilt, favoring an expanding Greater Israel vision, shredding remnants of the incremental Oslo peace process. But resultant tensions could boil over, necessitating careful management to avoid disturbances or violence spreading across the region in worrisome ways. Perhaps another bid at a negotiated settlement accounting for some Palestinian aspirations is essential, however remote now. NATO commitments. Trump's long history of slamming NATO allies for underspending on defense predated his presidency, but was very much central to his abrasive diplomatic agenda with Europe. He warned of lessening US commitments to the historic alliance if others didn't step up military budgets. This was received nervously in European capitals. While allies have worked toward the NATO target of 2% of GDP on defense, Trump has suggested this may not suffice. In a second term, he could continue hectoring NATO partners and perhaps set new expectations for contributions. Or if legal complexities or Congress thwart troop redeployments, the end of NATO could stay mostly rhetorical. Still, uncertainties over the durability of Article 5 mutual defense guarantees risk emboldening Russia. Alienating European partners through NATO threats also weakens the West's leverage in countering Russian moves. Thus, even symbolic questioning of core NATO principles could have cascading geopolitical consequences that the Trump administration might underestimate when flexing its unilateralist muscles. Iran nuclear deal. Trump made opposition to Obama's Iran nuclear deal a focal point early on. He complained it was too weak on restricting Iran's uranium enrichment and didn't address wider problematic issues like missile development or Tehran's regional influence. After pulling the US out of the multinational agreement, he ramped up sanctions pressure, hoping for better leverage on a restored pact. But this brinkmanship strategy has shown few tangible gains so far, with Iran expanding its nuclear work in response. Still, Trump may believe doubling down on sanctions and coercion in a second term could eventually force Iran's hand. Alternatively, with BNP Paribas penalties now lifted and China still importing Iranian oil, perhaps Tehran feels resilient enough to wait Trump out. There are also moderates now in Iran's government who could regain jurisdiction over the nuclear file after next year's presidential election. So for all his strong rhetoric, Trump may have painted himself into a corner on Iran, where behind-the-scenes compromise is the only path forward. Otherwise, military strikes seem highly unlikely except in extremis, while a regional nuclear arms race gathers pace, an uncomfortable legacy. Immigration policy. Trump made tougher immigration enforcement central to his domestic agenda too, with rhetoric and policies around the US-Mexico border hardening markedly. He sought billions for enhanced border walls despite congressional opposition. The travel ban, aimed primarily at Muslim countries, was also hugely controversial before being upheld by the Supreme Court. In campaigning, Trump has recently proposed going much further. He is speaking of aggressive deportation initiatives targeting millions of immigrants who entered the US illegally. And to deter new migrants, he has advocated allowing border agents to shoot petty criminals as they flee back into Mexico without judicial process, an extreme measure that risks causing an international furor over human rights violations. While such plans may rally Trump's base, executing mass deportations seems infeasible logistically and risks severe labor shortages in major industries. Shooting unarmed migrants could see prosecutions brought against Border Patrol members, preventing such excessive use of force. Thus, immigration may remain an arena where Trump's ambitions again outstrip realities on the ground. Without congressional cooperation, court challenges could also inhibit the harshest measures. Economy and trade. Trump will likely stick to conservative economic policies like corporate tax cuts and energy deregulation, continuing his first-term approach. While providing some stimulus, this risks longer-term fiscal and environmental issues. More worryingly, Trump has pressured the Fed to loose monetary policy before. He may again overheat demand, jeopardizing inflation targets and currency stability. Additionally, Trump favors broad trade barriers without heeding unintentional impacts on consumer prices. Though politically popular, supply chain complexities mean economic turbulence can spread globally. Overall, Trump's tendency for sweeping simplifications without technical nuance dampens business confidence. His unpredictable second term could either boost or hamper growth despite tailwinds. In closing, while some continuity with Trump's disruptive first term seems likely in areas like pressuring China and NATO allies, the breadth of risks on issues like Iran, Russia, the economy, climate change, and more means a second Trump presidency contains even greater unpredictability. The extremes of either crisis escalations or unexpectedly pragmatic deals reflect the president's unorthodox leadership style. But with the US and world at a vulnerable stage, a volatile second Trump term could have an outsized historical impact, for better or worse.